Welcome to the Geekscape Book Club. I am very excited to be here once again for our November episode, where we will indeed be speaking about the 1993 miniseries Venom Lethal Protector by David Michelinie and Mark Bagley. Well, sort of, because it's also by Ron Lim, starting right in the middle of the series. We'll talk about all of that. But as always, let me introduce our panel. Eric Connor will be coming right up, as they like to say. But with us now here in the flesh, Mr. Nate Miller. Nate, thank you for being here on the Geekscape Book Club.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And this will be an interesting conversation about Venom's first solo work. It is by the same writer who created the character. Todd McFarlane would be quick to point out co-created the character. But we will talk a little bit about that. And of course, with us at this moment is David Brody. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good. I'm freezing my you-know-what's off right now. It's cold here in New York, New Jersey area.
Oh, I guess this is that time of year, huh?
Yeah, I just came down into my studio here and forgot that the heat was off. So I'm a little bit shivering as it tries to catch up.
Well, that's all right. I hope it's at least a sunny day for Thanksgiving Day, which is the day after we're recording this. And that's the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade goes off without a hitch. We always watch from the comfort of our home across the country. But we're here to talk about none of that. We are here to talk about Eddie Brock, Venom. And this is sort of an interesting moment in the history of the Venom character, because he had really only existed as someone who wanted to eat Spider-Man's brain. And I guess they realized there was a little bit more to do with that. Let me ask you first, Nate. When was what do you remember some of your earliest memories of the Venom character, whether they were in comics or possibly in animation? Or when do you first remember, like, oh, wow, this black Spider-Man costume with the teeth looks pretty cool?
I think the show was my first like interaction with Venom the character. So like mostly as a villain. And then I remember a couple years later, after like taking a break from comics and coming back and finding out that he was more of like an anti-hero now, which was pretty cool. I don't know. Venom is a weird one where I feel like he's just kind of always been, as long as I've kind of been in the comics, you know, I definitely started with a lot of Spider-Man stuff. Sure. And by the time I was there, he was already an established character. So it was kind of always like a, I don't know, like always like a mainstay in the Marvel comics space.
Yeah, and I think that it does a lot for the longevity of the character. I'm not quite sure where my camera went, but I assume you guys hear me. So that's
we can hear you.
Yeah,
you're frozen.
That's all right. Who really needs to see me? That's really the question. In any case, I think that you can do a lot more with this character if he's not quite as one note. I'm gonna pop out and then pop in a second. But Brody, you had stopped reading comics by the time this is introduced as the Venom character, right?
Yeah. So as I showed you guys before we started recording, this was my introduction to the Venom costume, which was Secret Wars 8, even though he'd been wearing the costume for a while in the Spider-Man titles. And so as far as I knew, Venom was a symbiote blob that skulked off and tried to take over his mind at some point. But originally he was just a costume that was like, oh, I'll just jump on you and be a costume and be really cool. And by the time I stopped reading comics, he had not become Venom yet. Yeah. And so my first introduction to Venom was the first Venom movie, which is the exact opposite of Nate.
Wow.
Who knows that? Yeah. To me, it was like, oh, Venom, he's the costume. And I knew that he was in Spider-Man 3. Right. So
yeah, he sure was.
Yeah. Which was, I don't even remember the movie, to be honest with you. I don't even think
it's not great.
I got through it. So is that really Venom in Spider-Man 3? So, if so, then that's where I saw him first. But really my first real
Topher
exposure.
Grace plays Eddie Brock / Venom. I mean, you
Yeah.
can talk about the choices they made with them, but that is Venom in that movie.
Yeah,
And,
I don't remember watching the whole thing because I was just turned off by the reviews. So I'd have to say, honestly, Venom, the first movie, was my real exposure to the character. And now
Right,
going
yeah.
back, this was quite interesting.
Yeah, so there's some cameo appearances of him, but he is really introduced as Venom as we know him in Amazing Spider-Man 300. And as I periodically show on the show when I'm able to, I also have Secret Wars 8. But of course, this is still my only slabbed book. It is triple signed by Mike Zeck, Jim Shooter, and John Beatty, who is the inker on it. And
Nice.
I am, it being slabbed has a lot to do with having those three people signing it, and here's a little look at mine. The difference between me and Brody is that Brody would actually be able to read his.
Well, also, I paid 75 cents for mine when they were new. I've got 6 of them.
Yeah.
And you paid more than 75 cents, I believe.
No, I paid 75 cents. I paid to
Oh.
have it triple signed and slabbed and all that. But
Okay.
yeah, so I had it in just a stack of all my Secret Wars comics, and it survived, it endured all those important words. So yeah, and as we've talked about in the past, as it relates to the Venom character, it first appears sort of in the timeline of real life in Amazing Spider-Man 252, and Secret Wars was a monthly book. By the time that number 8 shows up, he's already had Reed Richards help separate him from the symbiote who was controlling him. So sort of a little bit of a backwards way to have that story unfold for all of us. And it's I mean, look, it's a cool suit, the black Spidey suit. There's no two ways about it. And sort of this idea that it was a symbiote and that it was, hidden away in Reed Richards' lab to terrorize Spidey another day was I think that was probably, some good long-term thinking, and it's good that they did something with him. So as we read this story, so as we said before, it is Venom Lethal Protector. And this is his first miniseries. And depending on how you read this, you realize that after these 6 issues, a month later, they started a second miniseries. Had the word funeral in it and was with the Punisher. So this is the early 90s. So this is the point where it's how many number 1 issues can we sell people? I know, instead of doing an ongoing Venom series, we'll do a bunch of miniseries, which is completely normal. And in fact, doing anything else seems abnormal at this point, just doing a bunch of miniseries. And I think that it really opens the door a little bit as to seeing a little bit about the Venom character. So I want to ask you first, Nate, reading this and having, more knowledge about Venom than even the creators involved in this series, what did you think as we see sort of this? I wouldn't say he's, this is the infancy of Venom, but he's probably I don't know, he's a toddler, I mean, it's there's so much more to come for this character. But what did you think about reading this book?
Well, first, I want to share with both of you and our listeners. There's another book that is entitled Venom Lethal Protector, which came out in 2022, written by the same guy, Michelinie. And I made the mistake of reading that first, thinking that that's what we were going to cover.
Oh no, I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I reread the email and I was like, this can't possibly be correct after reading the book. And I went back and found this one, the original one, and read that today.
Right.
I enjoyed it. It definitely it feels it's definitely an older style of comic, just in terms of the dialogue and the exposition. I did really enjoy the art. I thought it was great. That definitely brought me back to the time of when I first started reading comics. Um, yeah, it was kind of really wordy for me in some parts. But I do think in terms of like for the Venom character, it's kind of like a cool, almost like a Venom year one, even though he's kind of been Venom still for a little bit now. But it's a difficult process to transition a character from like a villain to being like a sympathetic anti-hero who's like trying to do the right thing but just like does it the wrong way. And I think the story does a good job of giving him motivations and like characters to interact with for him to like really be able to display to the reader that like he wants to change, his like philosophy, and he doesn't want to hurt people anymore, unless they're bad people and whatever. And I was also really surprised at how much Spider-Man was in this book, and I think he was used well, but I just was not expecting in Venom's first solo book to I mean, I guess I should have, that probably would have been the correct line of thinking, but yeah, I was surprised.
Yeah, Nate, what kind of short-sightedness would it take to tell Venom stories without Spider-Man being a big part of it? Oh wait, Sony does that. That's right. So yeah, and I also didn't expect him to be in it quite so much, and it helps that David Michelinie and actually Mark Bagley were the creative team on Amazing Spider-Man at the time, and they're were enough references to Amazing Spider-Man 375 as part of some of the images that Brody sent to me, were a couple of little nods from Danny Fingerroth, the editor, that like, yeah, this happened and that. So I decided to read it. And interestingly, this comes at the point where I hadn't stopped reading comic books, but I wasn't reading Spider-Man anymore. It was basically after the first Venom arc. I was like, all right, I get it. And his parents show up for the first time ever a little bit before issue 375. So it's right around the time that after I stopped reading. So it's sort of, there is a familiarity to it, reading a book like this. And I think that, a lot of times when you're using other characters, and it's not somebody who writes them all the time, it could feel a little weird. But this is definitely what this early 90s Peter Parker felt like. What did you think, Brody? This is, of course, after your time reading. But what did you think when you cracked open Venom Lethal Protector?
Well, let me address this graphic, this picture I sent you first, if you don't mind.
Please.
You referenced how Secret Wars 8, he was already not only wearing the costume, but he'd already had it removed, and it was the timeline didn't match up, and they released things out of order. Bottom right of this picture I sent you, it says, check out issue 375 of Spider-Man. It'll be available soon. So yes. they go ahead and they ruin the entire plot of that issue. They're like, oh, we had a fight and then we made an agreement, and he almost killed me, but he didn't. And then that'll be on sale soon. And
well, so I'm sure that wasn't the intention. And sometimes things get shipped in a different order. But sorry, finish your thought.
No, it reminded me of the Venom original appearance of Venom, at least this one, that it was out of order and that it was already ruined. So this for me was kind of a nod to that, unintentionally so. That everything you need to know happened, but it hasn't come out yet. I feel like Marvel did a poor job then of putting things in order, and clearly they knew it was out of order because it's right there. It tells you it. So that's why I sent that picture, by the way. Yeah,
I think that the timing of the release schedule definitely gets fudged sometimes. Interestingly enough, Uncanny X-Men Annual 14 shipped 2 months before Uncanny X-Men 266. So there's a guy named Gambit on the team in that annual. And you have no idea who he is if you bought them when they came out. And it depends. If a store has Uncanny Annual 14, they'll tell you that that's his first appearance. But his first appearance is considered to be Uncanny X-Men. So these things happen all the time. Just like being somewhat tardy, do you have some kind of note, Mr. Connor, for your tardiness? I believe you were about 12 minutes late today.
I'm sorry. I was slow.
Okay.
I didn't mean to cause problems.
And that's signed Epstein's mother, as far as I can tell. So.
Up your nose with a rubber hose. Good to see you guys.
Yes, thank you for being here. We're sort of in the early part of the conversation about this,
Yeah.
just sort of talking about this story being in the early exploration of the Venom character. What did you think overall about this, Eric?
Overall, it's Craven's Last Hunt. Craven's Last Hunt's like majestic. Craven's Last Hunt is deep. This one's fun. It's fine. It didn't necessarily deepen my appreciation of Venom, but it gave us some nice kind of Venom-y moments. It is fun watching Venom and Spider-Man actually have to work together. So I very much enjoyed that element of it. I love Eddie Brock's hair in this. The mullet, I think, really would have added a whole lot to Spider-Man 3 and to the Venom series. In fact, I think in some ways maybe Hardy's voice was like the mullet of voices, I would argue. Like something that was indescribable, not clear what it was for, and yet we can't quite shake that it added a certain luster to the proceedings. So it was a good series. Great. I don't know if it was great, but I did enjoy watching Venom try to be a good boy and how hard that is for him. That's when the movies tend to be better, is him on that razor's edge of darkness and light.
Yeah, I think it's a great spot for the character to be in, and they certainly settled into that after this point. And as before you popped in, I was explaining that this comes out maybe a year after I'd stopped reading Spider-Man comics. And
I was off for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, and I got pretty close to this because I know I have that first appearance of Carnage in 363, but this comes out around 375, and I was definitely gone by then. And it is a reminder of what was fun about that era, but yeah, it is definitely part of the Venom factory of churning out these stories. I mean, this is a 6-issue miniseries from the same creative team doing Amazing Spider-Man at the time. So it is just an extension of that. And the cover price was for 1993 a whopping $2.95 an issue. So that was not lost on me. So I never owned these books. I have only read them digitally now. But what are some of the things that maybe stand out to you, Nate, because it is from a specific era, and I'm going to assume you've read some things from at least around this time period, because all the McFarlane stuff is then, all the early Venom stories are all a little bit before this. So is there anything that was a little jarring for you as somebody who has read a lot more recent Spidey stories? And by recent, I mean in the last 30 years,
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of the Flash Gordon Venom stuff, a lot of the like space Venom, all very, very different directions. And I think what like stuck out the most for me reading this was, as I said earlier, just like the amount of inner monologue that happens and the almost kind of lighthearted playfulness of it was kind of jarring to get from Venom. It's what I would expect of Spider-Man at the time. But I think within the context, especially knowing that this is the same writer that was writing ASM at the time, contextually, I ended up being it's kind of he's like a darker reflection of Spider-Man, right? So he's still got the inner monologue, he's still got a little bit of the quips and stuff, just maybe not quite as sharp, and a little more jagged around the edge, so to speak. So I think that's really what stood out to me the most was just the difference in dialogue, and like there's something I feel like modern comics have gotten a lot better at showing and not telling things. Like it depends on the authors. There's always authors that are just going to be very word dense, but I've come to find myself more recently preferring authors that use or are able to lean on the artist to do more of the visual storytelling, and have the dialogue be something that's a little bit more kind of like I don't want to say realistic because that's silly, but more like what somebody would actually say. So that's the thing I think that stuck out to me the most. That is the part where like it does, and especially too, I'll say, like, Eric didn't hear this, but there's another book that came out recently with the same title by the same author that's supposed to be like them going back into that period of time and like exploring more of like this period of Venom. And reading that book, it's very similar, but it has more modern art, and I think that also is kind of what made it stand out to me when I read it, is that like, yeah, it's a really dense, like, it just feels like I'm reading an older comic. So I don't know. It's not a
Right,
bad thing at all. Like I know a lot of people really enjoy that style. It's just something for me that I don't want to say I've grown out of as much as I've kind of moved away from the regular like comics books that I'm reading more often these days.
Yeah, and there are certainly books that are much older than this that have a little bit more of a timeless quality. Obviously, we're talking about, some some of the timeless X-Men books and things like that that really stand out. But there's even plenty of Spidey stories. Eric and I, you referenced it before, but at the beginning of this year, we did discuss Craven's Last Hunt, which also was over 3 issues of monthly Spider-Man titles at the time. Speaking of the artwork, I wanted to shout out Mark Bagley, who actually is the winner of a book called the Marvel Tryout Book. So he submitted his samples and he was hired. And shortly before this, he was one of the artists that they said, "We like your style. Can you do us a favor and draw more like Todd McFarlane?" So prior to this, Eric Larson did that. And he drew a lot more like Todd McFarlane than Mark Bagley did. But one of the images that Mr. Connor shared with us is a kind of a throwback to the McFarlane era. And that is Mary Jane ready to, I don't know, do jazz aerobics or something. It's a very early 90s kind of look, but it's shouldn't be lost on anybody that they were going for a specific segment of the demographic. And this was an era that leaned into the fact that Mary Jane Watson Parker was a model, and they were ostensibly newlyweds. I mean, at this point, they've been married for probably more than 5 years of actual real world time. But in the book, they were still not married for that long. So they were leaning into that. But Eric, I assume that you shared this image with me because you felt it was suitable for framing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say I was leaning in too during this frame. I have to admit, I love, by the way, the big hair. She's got big hair. Venom lady's got big hair. Almost looks like a Dark Phoenix knockoff.
Hey man, it was the 90s. Come on.
Looks like Starfire from the Titans.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And Nate, to back up for 1 sec to what you're bringing up too. I remember at one point I actually looked at the title. I got the actual paper copy of this, the graphic novel or the compendium, and I would have, having read it, even though timeline wise I knew it was the 90s, it felt very 80s. And I completely agree, Nate. Like when the use of sort of internal monologues ad nauseum, it just seemed a little older than it was. And then this felt also to me like a throwback to late 80s, mid 80s. Like so there were moments in this I was just surprised because it was 93, I believe, yes. Right? Yes. Yeah. So and now given 93, I was off in college. This was not a period of comic books I was reading very much at all. So it is possible a lot of comics were like this in 92, 93, and I just didn't notice. But it did seem a little bit like a throwback. And yeah, that moment is so silly. It's like she's in this for, I think, maybe 2 frames, and that's about it.
He calls her 2 different times in the series, I think. Yeah.
And this is what she's wearing, which, and again, listen, I guess you get a little bored of just drawing black goop after a while. You want to draw something a little more shapely. But this moment is absurd. And it's just like she's posing and ready for jazzercise class, as you were saying, Christian. And it kind of, for me, like, it actually took me out of the comic for a moment. You know, I won't tell you why, but it did. And
Yeah, I think we know why.
Yeah. Well,
Wait,
look, I mean, it's
is
we're
this
only
thing
a
on?
few years removed from the Goblin Queen costume of Madeline Pryor, so it was and let's not forget that for multiple years they did do the Marvel swimsuit issue, so there were definitely leaning into young boys buying these books, and I think that there's always been an element of that, of course, but
Christian, I do like the placement of this image on top of Venom's mouth. I think
yes.
it adds a certain je ne sais quoi.
Yes, no, exactly. I think that that's sort of perfect. But I think that you scratch beneath the surface, any Spider-Man story is going to have the presence of Spidey at the center of it. So there's generally an overall quality to it that it makes it easily relatable because he is such a likable character. He is a well-intentioned person. He's a do-gooder, if you will. But and having read much of this era leading up to this, it was not entirely dissimilar. But I have mentioned that not too long ago I read the run of Amazing Spider-Man that was about 10 years before this when they first introduced the Hobgoblin, and that's some of the best Amazing Spider-Man that I've ever read. I think it's very engaging, and this is definitely a point where Marvel had been sold a couple of times, I think, in the previous few years. I want to say a makeup company owned them at this point, but I might be wrong. They had been owned by New World Pictures at one point, so there was a lot of people trying to figure out what Disney eventually found out was if you buy it, you should make your films like the comic books, and then people might enjoy them. But we're way ahead of that point in time. So it again was not my favorite issue. This was in fact, in the letters page of number 6 of this, which was shown in the digital version that I had, it said, make sure to look out for the foil. They didn't even use the word variant yet, but make sure to find the foil cover edition of the next series, the next Venom #1. And, they started selling them pre-bagged with cards inside of it. And it almost made me start to wonder, are they ashamed of the content of these books that they're bagging them up and things like that? So it is a very flashy time for sure, and not necessarily in a good way. But I do feel that Spidey, again, is Spidey in this. So it is fun to get to spend time with Spidey when he was still married to Mary Jane. Aunt May was alive and not dead, and then not brought back to life, having just been an actress that Green Goblin hired. I could go on all day, but I will not. So it is the throwback to like, oh yeah, it's still the Spider-Man that I knew. What did you think, Brody, as somebody that did not read this era, when it was actually happening, sort of jumping into this compared to some of the more recent things we've read?
Well, having gone back to read my 80s comics from our last episode where we talked about some of our favorite story arcs, the artwork is dramatically different. It's certainly, as Nate pointed out, nothing like what artwork looks like now, but it was very Todd McFarlane, very Spawn. It looked like the Spawn comics a lot. Everything was overly muscular. So I'll comment on that in a second. The inner monologuing was horrific. It was nonstop. There's one picture I sent you of a guy and it says he's talking about a window. I don't know if you have that one.
I said that too.
It's out. Hold on.
Is it this guy? I'm headed straight for that window. Yeah.
So this is actually outer monologuing. He yells, "No, I'm headed straight for that window." Nobody would ever say that as they were headed straight. That should have been inner monologuing. But they set it up for Spider-Man to make a joke like, you may be headed for it, but you're not going to hit it. I mean, that's just terrible writing. Going back to the page you had previously, which was the splash of Venom on the right, right there. So scroll back out, zoom back out if you don't mind. Yeah. So this was I gave you a lot of pictures that reference this, but let me just finish my analysis. The story was fine. It was nice to see Spider-Man with Venom. I was annoyed that Spider-Man played the bad sergeant in every cop movie, where he kept not believing that he was a good guy, and then he's like, "Oh wow, he turned himself around. I got to take him in. Oh, I can't believe he's actually cares about innocence. I'm gonna have to ambush him." Like the whole series, he's not believing that the guy is like he didn't. It took him not killing him at the end for him to go, "Oh yeah, I guess he's not a bad guy after all."
All right, Brock, you're off the force.
Yeah.
Give me your badge and gun.
Right.
Yeah, I
But
did.
he just
I did
wouldn't
have
believe
that,
it.
like whiplash
Was
there
that
for a
it?
second, where they literally explain, oh, they made a truce, and then like the next page, Spider-Man is there and just comes in hot, just kicks him in the back. Like no conversation of like, hey, didn't we talk about this? What's going on? Just immediately our hero breaks the truce, straight to violence.
Yeah, multiple times. First with the homeless people, not the homeless people, the guys with the machine guns who Venom's going after. He jumps in and defends them. He's like, "No, these guys are killers." Then later on, he tries to save Teresa's life without knowing what's going on. Like he became a bumbling superhero at that point, which I didn't think served his character well. Now, in this particular shot, this is one of 4 times in the series. If you look at the left side of the page that you keep zooming in away from, this is when Eddie Brock is in the containment zone, right? The thing I didn't like about this double page, which I sent you, is that he's trapped, right? On the left side, he's trapped. You'll never get out. And then your eye can't help but be drawn to the giant Venom on the right side of the page. There was no cliffhanger. You see he's out. I remember reading comics where the cliffhanger, you have to turn the page. You wouldn't know what happened. I just found this to be poorly laid out. And I don't know if it's laid out that way in the comic or just in the paperback I read.
I was going to say that's an interesting point because, when it was originally published, it could have been you turn the page to get to that one. There could have been an ad next to that image on the left.
Yeah.
We don't know because, again, I don't have these. Nor will I. This is certainly not something that I feel like I need to go and buy.
And Christian, can I speak to that too? Because I believe also the reason he was able to get out, they didn't turn it up all the way.
Yeah.
And they basically like, wow, we got enough for Venom, but oh my God, you didn't turn it up for full power. Like, what were they saving money? Were they worried about like not enough photons in the back?
Look,
I don't know.
They didn't use this term in that age, but Clintonflation was definitely running rampant, and they were trying to keep the lights on in San Francisco. All right, so I think that there is definitely a lot of that exposition where you're like, man, they're over explaining that, but they're over explaining it because it's kind of stupid. They make the same mistake a few times about the fact that Brock and Venom are not the same, and that the sonic screams don't actually affect Brock when he's not Venom, and that he's like, oh, it's fire. Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and run through that. I'll be okay. And at least they try to explain it where it's like, well, look at him. He's like, he's like in Olympic condition, which when Eddie Brock was introduced, he did seem a little bit more like Topher Grace, but that's all right.
Now, in reference to Eric's point and your point, I sent you pictures of each time that happens. If you don't mind pulling those up.
So you have a few emails. Is this in the
last email was all of them.
Okay. So I'm going to need a moment for that. And while I curate those, is there, Nate, to you, perhaps a little bit more rudimentary storytelling than might be customary really for this present day and age, and even the few years after this? Were there glaring things like this of like, ooh, okay, these are not great? What did you think, Nate?
Yeah, I mean, there was the story in general just seemed kind of unfocused. Like it seemed like the goal was to kind of humanize Venom a little bit, and you have what I think was the potential for a really great plot of this like underground society of unhoused people that have found community together are being are in danger because this big real estate developer wants to blow up the space or whatever. Like I think there is a really cool stuff that could have been done there, and it started off good with him like kind of saving them and him going to visit them, and there's like these attempts at like humanizing him and having these kind of moments of compassion to see, but it just doesn't feel very well followed through. And then for me personally, the whole thing with like actually we're getting the spawn of Venom, the Venom's kids now, like kind of like came out of nowhere and didn't really seem super relevant to anything else that was established before. There was no foreshadowing, and it ultimately didn't really even mean anything. So that part, I that's one of those things where it was like, yeah, design wise, it's cool to see the costumes. It's cool to see some of the art from like the fights or whatever. But from a narrative perspective, it doesn't like tie the whole story in very well. It doesn't feel like they did a good job of sticking the landing of the story that at least at the beginning it seemed like they set out to tell.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a good point. There's definitely threads throughout this series that are pretty interesting. And Brody was speaking about cliffhangers earlier. The first issue ends on a pretty amazing cliffhanger because it gives you the impression that they've somehow fallen through time. And then it's like, nope, it's just an old city underneath. You learn on like page 2 of issue 2. And I was like, oh, okay. I was kind of excited. So I can imagine reading this when it came out. So thinking for a whole month of like, oh man, there's some time travel aspect to this. I can't wait to, 30 days later. No, actually there isn't. But yeah, so I think that there are some great concepts. And you look, David Michelinie was in charge of Amazing Spider-Man during, it's sort of a tumultuous time, really. It kind of really the comic book industry was reshaped around this book, New Mutants and Uncanny X-Men, because of Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, and Jim Lee. You could say that there's other artists, but it's really those three. The emergence of them really changed the way that these stories got told. And I feel like it would be a disservice if I didn't point out that David Michelinie also wrote Avengers number 200, which is one of the single most problematic stories that has ever been published in the Marvel Universe. So, there's definitely a little bit of a mixed track record, but I would say I've enjoyed his work more than I haven't. All right. So Brody, you wanted to talk about, this is what I think the email thread you sent, right? With these.
Yeah. So in this one, he tells the guy, all right, now set your levels on kill. But they were there to kill him, but now they're going to set their levels to kill because they shot him, but he didn't die. So that's the first one. I don't know if you have another picture.
I do, but okay. I got to get to it. Yep. Is it there?
Yeah. So in this one, he says, he's faster than anticipated. We'll have to recalibrate our weapons. Again, why wouldn't you put them on as fast as possible?
Yeah. Well, again, you don't want to drain that battery,
Right, so. Right. And this is okay. So this one, let me see. Oh, that's this one. That's you idiot. Brock has Olympic level strength.
There it is.
Set the decibels too low. Why wouldn't you set the decibels as high as possible? Okay.
By the way, this shot has a great look at the mullet from behind, as it were. There's also a Mike Tyson view from the Jake Paul fight, but we're not really talking about that here.
Yeah, this is a follow-up where he says, all right, now set the decibel level density. Make sure it's a safe level this time. So he's reminding him, don't be stupid like the last time. And then this was my favorite one. Yep, there you go. In the top panel, the guy working the computer, he says, add some more restraining straps. Now, earlier, Brock was almost killed. He's like 1% alive. Yeah. And they left him on the table. They've already established he's Olympic level strength. He's a machine. He's a monster. He can't be stopped. He says, I'll add some more straps. And of course, before he can, he reaches up in the third panel and grabs his arm. And he tells him, I'm not dead. And I had time to recover. There's like 3 or 4 times where he actually says out loud, because you paused, I had time to recover. I didn't even send you those. Eric knows what I'm talking about. He's laughing.
Yeah. Yeah, he did kept say explaining that
it like, oh, I see that your gun you're loosening up your finger on the trigger. That gave me just enough time to get you now. Like every time, it was like the old 60s Batman show. I'm going to wait till that pendulum swings, slowly lowering down while I go rob the bank on 3rd and Main. You'll be here for another hour, but eventually you're going to die. Got to go. Nobody actually wanted to kill him.
Yeah. And this is this image that we're sharing for our visual audience. This is clearly the point where someone thought, I think Dolph Lundgren should play Eddie Brock in the movie
Yeah.
of this, because that's really the look from a much earlier era. This is really like Rocky IV Dolph Lundgren. This isn't Punisher Dolph Lundgren.
Well, they also like apparently had the smallest security guard watching over him, Mini Mike. Mini Mike, it's like it was like his first day. It's like Mini Mike can handle this. He's already dead. You sure
We're
about
only going
that,
to use
Mini
one
Mike?
strap.
But one strap of Mini Mike, I mean, right? He's the guy who usually just cleans up after us after movie night. Nah, Mini Mike's got this. Don't worry about it. And
That
look at
one
him.
strap ought to hold him. The whole electronic cell didn't hold him because he stuck his arm through Olympic strength. But that one strap, not a problem.
Oh, by the way, the hair here is just fabulous. I mean,
Epic.
really, it's everything I dream of when I close my eyes.
And he's even doing like the 1980s playgirl pose.
Yeah.
You know, getting out of bed with his leg bent. You know,
It's the Burt Reynolds Playgirl
yes.
cover that I've only ever heard about. I don't actually know what that looks like. Yeah, it is pretty amazing, and it is this crazy era of they refer to this in wrestling, but I think that this was the Attitude Era of Marvel Comics. It's not usually referred to as that, but I do feel like that was the case. So Eric, you did send a series of photos, of images. And I believe that on this episode, we're not going to make fun of your pictures. We're actually just going to look at them, if that's all right with you. I mean, we could make fun of them if you want.
Listen, it's called the Blatt cast, brother. It's not the Connor cast.
No, it's not.
the
No,
cast.
no.
Not when you show up late. It's not.
No, you listen. You're the captain. I'm just the Mini Mike in the back.
Yeah.
Get
So
those straps ready.
one of the things that you
Always.
shared was a tease for the upcoming issue. I don't know which issue this was, but Venom held captive, Spidey on the attack. And could it be? You're right. This actually does have the feel of like, what's this? Batman and Robin tied upside down over molten lava?
1993 was grunge. 1993 was darkness. And yet somehow this might as well be, Paul Lynde guesting on Batman kind of text, which by the way, I'm totally okay with. But it was
tremendous value in a Paul Lynde presence in anything.
Of
I
course.
could hear him saying Venomites.
And apparently this was before people found out asbestos was bad.
Oh yeah, that's quite all right.
Hey kids, go out and buy asbestos gloves.
What? But it's not. It was 93.
I know, that's my point.
Yeah, we had asbestos in my high school get removed in the 80s.
Yeah. Hey kids, go out and buy
yeah.
asbestos gloves and maybe some nicotine.
We had to combine my middle school and elementary school and share the same building for an entire year because asbestos was found in the elementary school. So when I was in 5th grade, we went to school from noon to 5:30 p.m. every day. And
Oh my God.
it was not something that I was well adjusted to. The morning part of the day is great because I could watch, Price is Right.
Price is Right,
before
yeah.
school, yeah. But that was really the
But you would
it's
have
really-
you'd have to leave
know-
before the final showdown, though.
I wouldn't get to see the Showcase Showdown. Yeah.
No,
So you
that's
know
a
what?
shame.
Those were actually dark times. Never mind. We have, a lot of these
Okay.
armored characters throughout. Do you have specific thoughts on
Yeah,
them though, Eric?
Too. So one of the issues I think in the writing of the storyline, so you have, and please correct me if I missed a thread here, but you have the guy whose son was killed by Eddie as Venom, and so he
Correct.
gets a whole group of mecha guys that he's built, including, if you can go back to the previous image, Christian, I think there was one of the team members, Sentry's kind of a cool name. Then I think one before that, the characters say Bomb Blast,
Yeah.
Sure.
but
Bomb Last.
Bomb, but what is Bomb?
Bomb
is that-
Blast.
Oh,
You know
bomb
what?
blast. That's right.
Oh yeah.
What-
Bomb
is there-
Blast.
Is there something I'm missing there? Is that a figure of speech from '93 I just didn't use in Philadelphia?
No, I would assume that's that
Yeah.
character's name.
You
But
know,
it
Bomb
brings
Blast.
up
Bomb
it brings
Last.
up for me when they, we're jumping ahead a little bit, when they introduce the Venom spawn, the Venom seed, none of those characters are named. Not a single one of them were given a name. It's like, here's a female one, and now I see what she looks like when she doesn't have the symbiote costume on.
What's up, Kitty Pots?
Yeah, Wikipedia has names for all those characters, but I don't know where they got them from, for the simple fact that we actually are not told those characters' names.
It's Star
as we're
Wars.
reading the story.
Yeah, Christian, but that was all those Star Wars figures. No one actually called Hammerhead.
So you have to. So I needed to buy the Venom Lethal Protector action figures to be able to know. So the female one was Scream. There's Riot, Phage, which I believe is Greek yogurt, Lasher, and Agony. So these are the names of these characters. And I'm not going to read through all this, but look at all this explanation for each of these characters.
My God.
Did they ever appear again? Were they ever seen in comics again?
They must have used those designs again.
Yeah,
Some of them
they've reappeared before.
From the Massachusetts Agonies, I believe. It's a very rich bloodline.
It was Agony all along.
Dang it. Earned it. So we have two sort of villains, right? We have what's that dude's name? I'm sorry, the guy who built he has a
Tony
model.
Stark?
No, he has a model because what was his name? Scrace or something? The bad guy in this.
Yeah.
So
Treese.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Treese, who's he's like an 80s villain because he builds a model of
and he
what
sounds
he
like
wants
Trask.
to build. Right. And then you have the guy whose son got killed. I don't understand why we had both of those storylines with their sort of a collection of Venoms, a collection of Sentries. It felt like, why were both plot lines in the same storyline? Unless there was a connection there that I just completely missed.
Actually, Eric, there's an explanation for it. It was so hot you need asbestos gloves. That's why they did it, to make it
asbestos reading glasses to really see it all. Yeah, but that just felt like it's something we say a lot in like screenwriting is like a lot of plot, not as much story. So it just felt like plot on top of plot, but storyline, the connection of that didn't really happen. I'm not sure why we had the storyline of the kid Brock killed's dad. It felt
if
like
this were a TV show or a movie, I would blame reshoots. But
or COVID, yeah.
It feels almost like it's like overwritten. Like there's like so much stuff happening, and none of it gets any time to develop or like mean anything or have any build up. Like the fact that they introduced 5 brand new symbiotes as like Venom's kid and got them in and out over the span of 2 issues, like it's kind of crazy.
There's really only There's only really 2 sequences with them too. They really don't utilize them. They look cool, and at least the way that I remember them, So it does seem that perhaps there is, that this perhaps was a fraught miniseries from an editorial standpoint. And I don't know anything. There wasn't anything I could find out, but I assume Mark Bagley only did the first 3 issues because he was also drawing Amazing Spider-Man at the same time. And
they were delayed.
Not everybody can do multiple books at once, and some people can't even do a monthly book. One of my favorite artists has always been Art Adams, but he can't handle a monthly book, so he does one-offs and miniseries, and now he does a lot of covers of variants usually. So and Ron Lim did Silver Surfer. I think that's only volume 2 at that point. So he was great. So it was like they switched an artist that I had respect for. I kind of love his backstory, Mark Bagley, for winning the Marvel tryout book. But I had always preferred Ron Lim anyway. So it was like, all right, it's not going to be a problem with me. But it does have a lot of feeling. We've got multiple bad guys. We have at least it's 2 different artist teams, although our buddy Al Milgrom does the inks on issues 4 and 5. So I think it's nice to shout him out because he was very generous with his time earlier this year over on Marvel Movie Talk. If you want to find that episode, I was going to say those episodes. I'm like, oh yeah, I actually just crammed it all into one episode. But if you want to spend 2.5 hours hearing great comic book stories, the episode with Al Milgrom is a great one. And I'm saying that because of his contributions, not because I'm on it. So yeah, you always have to wonder when it's not the vision all the way through. It's not the same team for these 6 issues of a miniseries, and I think that it's not a cohesive story, and Spider-Man being in San Francisco does kind of take us outside of it a little bit, because he's
When
out
they
of his
started
comfort
with
zone.
him going to San Francisco, my thinking was like, oh, okay, they're going to give him like a little bit of a clean break, give him his own characters, and like let him kind of build. And then they're like, oh, Peter, got to go to San Francisco too. And I was like, what? It almost feels like this whole collection of book almost feels like if like you sat down like a kid, like a 10-year-old, and was like, hey, like tell me about Venom's solo book. And it's like, yeah, he fights these guys, and then everyone's all muscly, and he's got a mullet, and then they put him in a trap, and there's no way out of the trap, but then he just like pushes his hand out of the trap and like figures, and there's just like a lot of like, and then it's like when you're playing with a kid and you're like, I tagged you. It's like, no, you didn't. I actually moved out of the way in slow motion and you didn't see it. Like, and then he has 5 kids and there's 5 Venom kids. And it's like, what?
And there's robots and there's people in metal suits and they've got different names.
And I spelled
like
Bomb Blast wrong. Hey, sorry.
This is a good time to remind everyone of Sam Bibley's comment, he who bombs last bombs best, because I think I actually just put it on the screen and I didn't read it. Who was who's trying to talk? Brody, Eric?
Can you pull up the picture of Treese with his arms crossed? That's the one he's in a black suit. Because that's, to Nate's point about this being written by a kid, this whole 6 episodes was about Treese wanting to uncover the gold buried under the park.
Yeah.
Instead of maybe taking ownership of an entire city, he wants the gold, right? That's what this is about. Not the city. He could rent out apartments and office space and be a legendary explorer. He found the city. That's not what it's about. And when you pull up the picture, I'll give away where I'm.
This guy is not Lex Luthor, who wanted to blow up the Western Seaboard.
Millions of dollars.
Yes. Yeah. So he and the millions of dollars of gold it represents. He had to have spent more than millions of dollars on those digger robots. I mean, only
the model
would be like, yeah, millions and thousands of dollars. I mean, you're going to blow up San Francisco. And you're going to kill Venom, and you have symbiotes and all this machinery and laser guns and these digger things, and you want to wipe out the homeless people for millions of dollars of gold. It should have been billions. Even in 1993, make it billions.
It is a very Austin Powers moment of asking for millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars of gold. And how do you sell millions of dollars of gold? It was just, I was like, what's the big plan? They teased it. Well, I'm never going to find out the real reason we're renovating the park. I'm like, oh, what's this? Well, I wonder what the reason is, because what could be better than taking over, like finding an entire city and claiming ownership of it? Millions of dollars of gold.
Oh, wait. And the payoff, it wasn't really even under the city. It was like nearby. Yeah. So they could have gotten it without bothering anyone.
Right. Just dug it up. With a metal detector. It could have gone with a little metal detector. And it was like 2 feet deep, according to the end picture. It was in crates.
So what we do get from this story, and in a lot of ways, it's an extension of Amazing Spider-Man 375, which, as I said, I did read after I read this because I referenced this
available soon.
Yeah. Available just as easily as this, fortunately for me. And that introduces the character of his ex-wife. This one, and in that story, they reference his dad. So we get his dad in this, and they don't do much with that. You feel like, all right, they must have plans for this character. But they're really, before Amazing 375, and I did do a little bit of research on this, you didn't know anything about Eddie Brock before he started taking pictures, trying to compete with Spider-Man. And ending up with Venom. So you're like laying the framework, I think, which is smart to give him the supporting cast And Sam Bibley has a great observation. I was like in 3rd grade reading this stuff. It seems so gritty. I mean, in a lot of ways it was, because Venom just looked like that. He had the sharp teeth. Mary Jane Watson was doing Mousercise on the Disney Channel every morning. At least I assume that's why she was dressed that way. I'm not quite sure. She, at the very least, had some of those Jane Fonda workout tapes. And I think that the more mature seeming content was definitely like especially the Punisher miniseries, So there was a feel when I would read stuff like that. I'm like, oh, this may not be age appropriate. I love it. It's more like it's really a mess. It doesn't really know what it wants to be. I think that it does provide some nice foundation that future Venom stories were built on. But I do think we're at a place where it's safe to say that I wouldn't recommend this story to anyone, really, unless you were trying to do one of those things where you read every Marvel comic book ever published and, you started when you were like 12. I don't quite know what someone would get out of this. You want to read this era of Amazing Spider-Man? Sure, go ahead. You're going to get stories that, were impacted by what was coming in the future. You had his parents returning, but there's not much here, I think, and we've sort of touched on all the reasons why. What was your thought on this image, Eric, where this is part 4, so this is issue 4, and I believe he's being separated from the symbiote at this point?
One of the pieces of art throughout this series I liked was the transformation kind of moments, or him getting Venom like yanked out of his system. There was also kind of a cool moment where his eyes, like his pupils, were getting like covered in like the black ooze, and that stuff I thought was kind of great, and that's what's great about Venom, And sometimes the movies even get that right, where a moment where the transformation looks actually kind of awesome, and so some of the moments worked. This was again the to your point, Brody, the explanation of things. That long-winded explanation allowed us to recover from your initial attack, is what Venom is saying at this point. There's a lot of subtext and text here, a lot.
Treese really falls into the mid-level Bond villain trope.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let me over-explain this to you so that you have enough time to get away. I would say that for me, the one thing that is a positive takeaway out of this is you see sort of the development of the way that Venom is portrayed in the films, where he has conversations with himself and sort of the way he talks. This is, again, sort of, it's like a baby step of that. So it was more like interesting in that way. It's almost like hearing demo recordings of an album you love and you go like, oh man, it sounds really good now, but it's kind of interesting what they were trying to do that was different. So it's like, these are kind of the Venom demos, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And they put a lot more effort into really fleshing out the character. And, I did think of getting some of the, taking a look at one of the newer stories, but I thought that this was his first solo book. So I kind of wanted to take a look at where all of this kind of began for Venom as the lethal protector, as the anti-hero, coming literally one appearance after he told Spider-Man, all right, I'm going to stop trying to eat your brain, I guess. I guess you're a good guy too. He's literally, until Amazing 375, he didn't grasp the concept that Spider-Man actually was a good guy. He's like trying to keep his parents safe from him. Peter's parents, because it's like, no, they were safer in the prison that they were in for 20 years. Now they're back around you. And there's some truth to that they could have explored, because Gwen Stacy would have been much better off had she never met Peter Parker. That's for sure. Are there any final thoughts on this for each of you before we talk about what we'll be doing in December? Nate, is the follow-up Lethal Protector 2, is it too similar to this, or is it like, oh, it's actually better than this?
No, it's pretty much exactly this. Like, the story feels slightly more like focused. But the exposition and writing style is definitely still there. I did enjoy the art. It's a nice kind of like a throwback look with a kind of a modern spin on it. If you really enjoyed this book, I would definitely read the 2022 Lethal Protector by the same author. I think you will also enjoy that one. I personally am gonna pass on that.
Well, that's unfortunate because you did already read it, so
I
now
did,
you're stuck.
unfortunately, yes. But fortunately, when I finished it, I was like, this can't possibly be what Christian picked for us to talk about. So let me double check, and sure enough, it was not. So fortunately, it was bad enough that it made me double check what I was supposed to read. So I read the right book.
Now it can be tough to quantify art in any sense, but would you say that Lethal Protector 2 is worse than this, or they're both kind of bad in the same way?
I think it's better than this just because it benefits from the more modern conventions of comics that we have. It is a modern comic book that just has more of a like retro influence in style as opposed to Lethal Protector 1, which is just an older book. It's an attempt at giving a side character that had some popularity their own story, but without having like a clear creative decision and direction of like, this is where I want the story to go. And they were just like kind of shuffling through authors, getting these mini stories out with this character that hadn't fully been cooked yet. Whereas the one cool thing I will say about Lethal Protector 2 is it's this idea that there's I wish that I would love for us to do one of these where we read like King in Black or like one of the more recent.
That's what was my first thought was actually King in Black. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to do that and get your opinion on that, because with the context of what Venom is as a character now, then having this Lethal Protector 2 book that's like, okay, what if we just ignored all that stuff and went back to like the first time he got his solo book and just kind of like wrote more adventures within that time space. And so within that context, I think it's a cool idea, especially if like that was your era of Spider-Man, that's your era of Venom you really enjoy. But if it's not, I would not recommend the book.
Yeah. Brody and Eric, as spinoffs go, this is a lot less Good Times or the Jeffersons, and it's more like After MASH or possibly the spinoff from Barney Miller, Fish. It's the Tortellis spinoff from Cheers. So this is sort of like, well, no, Joey was, I can't even pretend. Yeah, Joey was actually pretty terrible. I actually forgot about Joey. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's how bad Joey was. None of the friends guest starred in either season.
No, and he didn't have a friend. Like he didn't have a buddy on the show. There was no neighbor he could hang out. The landlord was like
he lived with Adriana from The Sopranos.
Mateo, yeah.
I needed a buddy, a boy buddy, a guy buddy. It was just like it was missing the Chandler type somebody in that show for him to like bounce stuff off of.
So what you're saying is that Venom Lethal Protector would have been better if he'd hung out with Matthew Perry. And,
yes, have a Chandler character.
I don't disagree. I think that those one-liners would have gone actually pretty far.
A Chachi to his Joni.
I would say the best thing about this is I just looked. Free returns from Amazon. That is the best thing I could say.
You can return that after reading it?
Read it. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think Jeff Bezos is watching this video.
No, he's actually a big fan of Eric Connor. I don't know if you knew that.
Who isn't?
Yeah.
But once Bezos left after the 11-minute mark when he wasn't here. So
Lauren, I know one person named Lauren who's not a big fan of Eric Connor, and that's just mean, isn't it, Eric?
It cuts deep. I just had my 21st anniversary, and this is what you say.
Yeah, well, it's the sad thing is that this is how she wanted me to tell you. So
just forget.
Yeah. In any event, we appreciate anybody who does follow up on sort of the announced reading that when we do it. And I appreciate you guys reading this. I think I had an expectation that this was going to be at least a little bit better than it actually was. And I will have to say that I was incorrect. But Brody, has this turned you off from comics from the early 90s for a little while?
No, not at all. In fact, again, I don't know what years off the top of the years, but I just got Craven's Last Hunt arrived, and
Great.
Daredevil Born Again arrives on Monday. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely
Daredevil-
looking into better series. I don't think the year is the problem. I think this was
No.
just a poorly written trash bag of an arc.
No, I would say that this is a product of the era it came out in, when all of the Image guys left to do Image, and they were like, "Oh my God, we had these like record-breaking sales. Let's try and figure out a way to do that. Let's have a Venom book that has a bunch of number ones." It's a little bit more of a testament to that time. Yeah, Daredevil Born Again is like 1985. Craven's Last Hunt, though, is actually it's a number of years before this. It's like 5 or 6 years before this. So yeah. Well, I do want to let everybody know that if you want to do any reading for our next episode, time and date TBD, but it'll be Hellboy: A Christmas Underground, which also, as kind of a B-side, we'll be looking at Uncanny X-Men 143, which is one of the quintessential Christmas stories, and not because Kitty Pryde is the main and almost the only character for that whole story, but it's also John Byrne's final issue of Uncanny X-Men. So we'll be talking about that in December, and in that episode, we're going to be announcing what all of our books are for 2025. We have the release calendars, so there might be an opportunity or two to call an audible, but we're going to tie into what Marvel has coming up and what DC has going on in 2025. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And Eric Connor. Yeah, well, he's that's good. So I'll go to you last because we're enjoying the mute. But Eric, how can people find you?
You can find me at Ken Eric Connor over on X as well as Instagram.
Yes, and David Brody, where can people spend more time with their favorite Brooklyn boy?
You can find me on the Brooklyn Boys podcast, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And of course, on most social media, including Blue Sky now, Twitter and Instagram at David Brody, and at TikTok, David Brody 12.
Yeah, I have joined the Blue Sky, and it's very weird because the interface looks just like Twitter, but the font is slightly different. It's like they use Times New Roman instead of regular Times New Roman. I'm not quite sure what exactly it is, but look, if people go over there, it's going to be great. But I can't delete any of these apps until I feel like everybody else has kind of done the same.
I just deleted the Kick app. The Kick app.
I didn't realize you had the Kick app.
It was the next big thing around 10 years ago, and then the Line app was also huge. I just deleted that. So,
what? Do you still have Boomerang or?
No, I got rid of Friendster and Boomerang and MySpace. I'm all clear now.
All right. Well, Tom is still a friend of mine. He's still in my top 8. Mr. Miller, Nate Miller, where can people find you and continue the conversation about Venom Lethal Protector 2 if they also made a mistake?
Yes. So now I'm a specialist in, as I read it, both of them. You can find me on the internet at Dog Like Nate with 2 G's.
And I am, of course, at Christian DMZ on Threads and Blue Sky and even on Facebook, actually. So you can find me everywhere over there. Our next episode of Marvel Movie Talk will be a part of the Geekscape annual holiday fundraiser. That'll be Friday, December 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Tune in early. We are given exactly 50 minutes for that episode. And I'm not good at keeping things brief, but we're going to look ahead towards everything that's coming out in 2025. But don't worry, we've got some other shows planned because we're going to have to talk about Kraven the Hunter and What If Season 3 and so much stuff. But for this show, join us on a yet to be disclosed date and time to talk about Hellboy: A Christmas Underground. That'll be our story for next month. And I appreciate all of you for giving me your time and everybody in the chat. As long as they keep writing them, we'll keep reading them. See you next month, everybody.